Hello. My name is Solène, and last month I found out my own mother used my name to take out an $80,000 loan without telling me. But before that bomb dropped, she asked me to sell my Manhattan apartment, so my sister's failing boutique wouldn't embarrass the family. The whistle of the kettle pulled me back into the present just as my phone vibrated across the marble countertop. The screen lit up, displaying my mother's name, Vera. I didn't expect anything earth-shattering, but the message that followed, "Sell it. Leora's boutique is drowning." The kettle's whistle cut through the morning silence like a blade, shrill, urgent, uninvited. I flinched, blinking back into the present as steam coiled into the ceiling like a silent scream. My phone vibrated across the marble countertop, skittering slightly like it, too, wanted attention. The screen pulsed with a name I hadn't said aloud in months. Vera. My mother. I expected nothing new, nothing kind, but still I looked. I always looked. A reflex born not of hope, but history. Sell it. Leora's boutique is drowning. That was the message. No punctuation. No greeting. No how are you, or where are you? Just a command, disguised as concern but heavy with entitlement. I stared at the words, the steam fogging the lower half of the screen and the glass backsplash behind it. My hand, already mid-pour, hesitated. 1 second too long. The boiling water splashed against my wrist, scalding hot. I didn't even flinch. What was one more burn? No acknowledgement of my absence. No curiosity about my silence. Not a single syllable about the fact that I had vanished from their lives without ceremony. No party, no breakdown, not even a fight. Just a ghost slipping between train stations. But now I was remembered. Not as a daughter. Not even as a person. As an asset. As square footage. As a solution. My wrist throbbed. A whisper of pain, nothing more. Not compared to the static crawling up my chest. The pressure that started in the ribs and bloomed outward, slow and aching. I sat down, spine rigid, phone glowing beside me. My tea cooled on the counter. Like everything else I'd ever offered them, it sat, ignored, losing heat by the minute. They didn't know I was in New York. Not really. I hadn't announced it. I owed them no declarations, no Instagram updates or life summaries. I left quietly, like all unwanted things do. 1 duffel bag, 1 train ticket, and a phone switched off for 3 days. And they didn't notice. Not until someone posted a photo. Probably a cousin with a loud mouth and a smartphone, tagging my name beneath the view from my balcony like it was public domain. That's how I became relevant again. Not because I called. Not because I was missed. But because I had something they needed. Because my apartment, my small, hard-earned pocket of peace, had become, in their eyes, a floating life raft for my sister's failing boutique. I rose slowly, letting my fingertips drag across the edge of the countertop. I had installed it myself. 3 miserable weekends, 6 tutorials, 2 broken drill bits, and a sense of purpose sharp enough to bleed. I had cursed through the sweat and the heat and the isolation. And when it was done, level and gleaming, I had cried. Not because I was proud, but because I was free. That countertop didn't just hold a kettle or a coffee maker. It held proof. Proof that I didn't need them. Proof that I could bleed for something and have it mean something. But to them, it was square footage in Manhattan. A resource. A solution to someone else's problem. Leora's problem. The golden child. I moved to the window, my bare feet silent on the floorboards I had restained one summer night with music blasting through an old speaker. The skyline greeted me, distant and impersonal, exactly how I liked it. The city didn't know my name. It didn't care if I belonged. And in that indifference I found safety. I leaned against the frame, feeling the cold of the glass creep into my shoulder. Outside, a siren wailed, distant, almost poetic. Down below, people moved like ants with umbrellas, crossing intersections, chasing clocks. No one was looking up at me. No one knew this was my home. That was the beauty of anonymity. It protected you from being seen only when it was convenient for others. The phone buzzed again. Another message. She's not asking for much. You know she's struggling. As if that was a reason. As if my silence was a promise, and my survival a vault to be opened. I sat again, this time on the edge of the couch. The armrest dipped slightly under my weight. No one had ever sat here but me. No one had touched the gray fabric, or spilled wine on the corner, or left behind crumbs. This space was unshared, uncomplicated, unobserved. Except now it was invaded. A digital request disguised as a cry for help. But what they really wanted was access. To my choices, my sacrifices, my freedom. Leora was struggling. I wasn't surprised. She had always been great at dreaming, less so at sustaining. But when the boutique opened, who quietly transferred money from her savings, who adjusted her own timeline, skipped vacations, took freelance jobs she didn't want. Me. When the boutique was featured in the local magazine, whose name was left out. Mine. The captions praised Leora's taste, her courage, her drive. No mention of the rent I covered for the first year. No nod to the nights I listened to her cry, doubting herself, begging for reassurance. She was the sun. I was the scaffolding. And now the sun was fading. And they needed me again. I tilted my head back, closed my eyes. My wrist stung. I ignored it. Pain was simpler than conversation. I walked to the sink, ran the burn under cold water, the hiss of the faucet masking the crackle of resentment building behind my teeth. I could have ignored the messages. I could have blocked her number. But I didn't. Because some part of me still waited for what I didn't know. An apology. Recognition. A line that read, "We see you now." I poured another cup of tea. Steady this time. No shaking. I returned to the couch, crossed my legs, stared at the painting on the wall, a street in Florence. I had walked it alone during grad school. It had rained that day. I had no umbrella, but I smiled the whole way. No one knew I took that trip. No one asked. That painting hung here not because it was expensive or impressive, but because it was mine. Unshared. Unclaimed. A knock might come tomorrow. Another message. A guilt trip, maybe. But for now I had silence. Even if it was temporary. Even if they had learned to read my silence like an invitation. Let them knock. Let them ask. Because I had built this life from the ground up. And freedom built on debt is just another kind of cage. The tea had barely cooled when the first buzz came from the intercom. A short, sharp sound that sliced through the early evening hush of my apartment. I let it go. It buzzed again, longer this time, more insistent. Then silence. I stood still, mug in hand, my thumb pressed into the rim hard enough to sting. Maybe it was a delivery. Maybe someone forgot their key. But the knock that followed was not the knock of a stranger. It was deliberate, familiar. It was a knock that assumed welcome. When I opened the door, the air shifted. Leora stood there like an actress waiting for her cue, smile too wide, sunglasses perched on her head as if we were standing on some vacation patio. Draped across her arm was a carefully folded trench coat, too expensive for the weather. Behind her was my mother, face placid and unreadable as ever. And at their feet, suitcases. Not one, 3. The kind with tiny wheels and zipper compartments, the kind people bring when they've already decided how long they're staying. Surprise! Leora sang, her voice syrupy with performance. We thought it'd be fun to drop by, just for the weekend. I didn't speak. I didn't even move. But the door opened wider anyway, as if some invisible force had swung it fully open. Habit, maybe. Her daughter, Ava, no older than 6, barreled past me with the force of a small hurricane. The little rolling bag she dragged behind her thudded across my hardwood floors, leaving behind faint scuffs. I had refinished those floors myself last spring. Sanded, stained, sealed. I remembered the ache in my knees. None of that mattered now. My mother walked in next, purse in hand, as if this had always been her home, her expression unreadable but firm, neutrality with edges. She placed the bag on my kitchen counter like she was reclaiming lost territory. The scent hit me almost immediately, her perfume. A mix of jasmine and rose water, the same blend she wore to church and funerals. It clung to the air, seeped into the fabrics, pushed aside the lavender candle I had burning by the window. "I wanted to see your place," my mother said calmly, as though she'd been invited. Pictures never do it justice. The words landed like hooks, polite on the surface, but beneath them something metallic and sharp. Leora was already gliding into the guest room, calling over her shoulder, "We'll get out of your hair soon. Just a little family weekend. We brought snacks." I hadn't spoken, not one word. And still, my apartment shifted around me like clay being reshaped, furniture pushed slightly out of place, fridge door opened without permission, drawers tested like they were public property. I watched Ava jump onto the bed, shoes still on, tossing plush toys into the air like she owned gravity. Leora was unpacking as if she'd paid for the room, organizing skincare bottles on the nightstand, laying out her scarf on the dresser, humming under her breath. My mother filled the kitchen with grocery bags. She began arranging them methodically on the counter, her eyes scanning for where I kept the coffee. "I figured you'd need a few things," she said, reaching for the cabinet above the stove without asking. "You never buy the right kind." I watched her hand move, fluid, practiced, the same hand that used to comb my hair too tightly, the same hand that cleaned while muttering judgments under her breath. She hadn't changed. She had simply relocated her rituals. By 8 p.m., my apartment no longer smelled like my life. It smelled like theirs, detergent from another household, department store perfume, processed cookies, and the subtle stink of old arguments repackaged as kindness. After dinner, a meal I hadn't planned but somehow ended up cooking, Vera lingered in the kitchen. She leaned against the counter, eyes traveling slowly over the cabinets, the tile, the lighting, as if mentally appraising the space. Then came a sentence. "Would it be okay if we kept a spare key? Just in case something ever happens to you." She said it so casually, like it was a favor to me. Like I hadn't spent years building the space as a fortress against exactly this kind of intrusion. I turned to her. She smiled too easily. The same smile she used when she forged my signature on a student loan application. The same one she wore at my graduation, posing for photos she'd post online like they were trophies earned from someone else's effort. I didn't answer. Silence felt safer than conflict. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. With people like Vera, silence was an empty room they'd gladly move into. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling like it held secrets. The quiet was gone. In its place, muffled footsteps, the soft clink of glassware in the kitchen, the quiet creak of pipes reacting to unfamiliar weight. Even the hum of the refrigerator sounded louder. The air felt denser. My home was no longer mine. It had been colonized by history. Memories surfaced like bruises you forgot you had. My 20th birthday, Vera appeared in my dorm with cupcakes and plastic balloons, dragging Leora along. What was supposed to be a quiet dinner with friends turned into a show about family unity. My first apartment, Leora borrowed the keys before I'd even bought furniture. When I came back from a weekend shift, her clothes were in my closet. No explanation, just expectation. My first promotion, I never told them, but they found out. Somehow, the raise was never about what I earned. It became about what I could give. Fixing a roof back home, sending money to a cousin's wedding, paying for things I wasn't invited to. They always found ways to turn my victories into shared property. At 2:13 a.m., I went to the living room, sat in the dark, listened to my own breath. I wondered how long they'd stay this time. The weekend? A week. Long enough to start leaving things behind. That's how it always began. By morning, the sun cut through the blinds like a blade. The light didn't feel warm. It felt interrogative. I walked into the kitchen. My mother stood at the counter, already dressed, stirring coffee. Her posture suggested permanence. Leora appeared behind her, holding 2 mugs like some cheerful barista. "Oh," she chirped. "I made you one too. I told Mom we'll stay till Sunday. Hope that's okay." I reached for the cup she offered. The ceramic was warm. My fingers trembled slightly, not from anger, but from something deeper. Recognition. Resignation. A grief with no name. They had entered my life not like guests, but like gravity, something to endure. They carried their needs in silk bags and called it family. They called it love. I smiled. The kind of smile that closes doors instead of opening them. "Of course," I said. "Stay as long as you need." And in that moment, something in me cracked. Not loudly, not with drama, just a small, precise fracture. Like glass under pressure, soundless, invisible, but permanent. The rain started just before sunset, steady and soft, tapping against the glass like a nervous habit. I could hear the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen. My mother's rhythm was unmistakable, measured, controlling. The smell of roasted chicken filled the apartment, warm and suffocating. When I walked into the dining room, she was already arranging the plates as though she had rehearsed this moment for days. Everything was perfect. The linen napkins I kept for guests were folded neatly beside polished silverware. My own table felt foreign to me, as if I had walked into a stage play instead of my home. "We haven't done this in so long," Vera said brightly, smoothing her blouse before sitting down. Her tone was sugary, her smile fixed. Leora poured wine with the exaggerated confidence of someone pretending to be generous. "Family dinner," she said cheerfully. "Feels just like old times." Old times. The phrase scraped something raw inside me. Old times meant unpaid debts, silent guilt, and the feeling of being useful only when they were drowning. I forced a smile, took a seat, and waited. The rain outside softened the edges of the city, but inside, everything sharpened. The smell of lemon polish, the sound of forks against porcelain, the way my mother's eyes tracked my every move. For a few minutes, we made small talk. Weather. Work. A passing joke about the traffic. But then the conversation began to shift, almost imperceptibly, like a current pulling me under. Leora sighed dramatically, setting down her glass. "Business has been tough lately. You know how the economy is." Vera nodded in agreement, as if the line had been scripted between them. "And your niece, poor thing, so stressed about school. Private education costs a fortune these days." I knew where this was heading. I could feel the tension in my jaw, the heat creeping up my neck. They were circling the point like predators testing the air. Then came the line that snapped something in me. "You're so blessed," my mother said gently. "Blessed to be child-free right now. That's why you're the only one who can help." I set my fork down. The sound it made against the plate was too loud, too sharp. Inside, a quiet scream rose but didn't escape. I wanted to tell her how many times I had helped, how I had wired money from a paycheck I could barely stretch, how I had given, again and again, until giving became my only language. But I didn't. Not yet. Every choice I had made, no marriage, no children, no chaos, was now being recast as selfish luck. Every sacrifice rewritten as abundance. They weren't asking for help. They were demanding proof that I was still loyal. I leaned back in my chair, pretending to consider. "How much are we talking about this time?" Vera's eyes brightened with relief. "Oh, nothing crazy. Just enough to cover a few months of rent for Leora's shop. She'll pay you back, of course. Leora nodded quickly, as though the lie might turn true if she agreed fast enough. You know I will. Once things pick up, I'll make it right. I remember the last time she said those exact words. I remember the bank statements, the overdraft fees, the silence that followed once the money was gone. My mother reached for my hand across the table, the same way she used to when she wanted to soften the blow. Honey, she said softly, you don't have children. This is your chance to mother something that matters. Her voice was tender, her eyes glossy. She was good at this. Too good. The wine burned down my throat. I gripped the glass tightly, knuckles pale, and swallowed the bitterness that wasn't from the drink. They had turned my life into a debt ledger. Every absence, every freedom, every quiet choice twisted into evidence that I owed them everything. I'll think about it, I said finally, keeping my tone even. Vera smiled as if the decision was already made. We'll talk about numbers tomorrow. No rush. After dinner, she gathered the plates, humming softly while Leora checked her phone. Their rhythm was effortless, the choreography practiced, guilt delivered in harmony. When the dishes were done, they kissed me goodnight like actors, leaving the stage after a standing ovation. My face ached from pretending. The rain had stopped by the time I sat back down at the table. The candles still flickered, small and stubborn. I stared at the empty plates, at the crumbs left behind, at the wine stains bleeding slowly into the tablecloth. I gave up birthdays, trips, weekends, sleep. I gave up myself, quietly, willingly. And now they serve that sacrifice back to me as proof that I still owe them more. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to the clock on the wall. Each second landed heavy, deliberate. They thought I'd forgotten. They thought I never kept records. But I did. Every transaction, every message, every apology that was really a manipulation. The ledger wasn't open, it was closing. Tomorrow, when Vera brought it up again, I would be ready. Morning light filtered through half-closed blinds, slicing across the kitchen counter where yesterday's wine glass still waited. I didn't touch it. Instead, I stood over the sink with a spoonful of yogurt, the kind that promised health and silence in equal measure. I barely tasted it. The apartment was too still. Even the hum of the refrigerator felt judgmental. I had promised myself that today I'd stay calm, that I'd face whatever game they brought with composure. But my chest already carried the tightness of something coming undone. By the time evening arrived, the rain had turned the sky to dull metal. My laptop glowed in the dim corner of the living room, the cursor blinking like it knew what I was about to find. I sat down slowly, letting my breath settle before opening the file I'd been avoiding. Old transfers, dated emails, bank receipts I'd saved just in case. There it was, a string of payments from 3 years ago. The subject lines: house repairs, roof fund, urgent plumbing. The amounts lined up perfectly with the savings I had drained to help them. I clicked one at random, feeling the numbers blur. Then I found it. A post. Leora's smiling daughter posing in front of a freshly painted wall. Pink, covered in glittering decals of castles and stars. The caption read, "New princess-themed bedroom for our little star. Thank you, Mom." No mention of me. Not even a hint that I existed. I stared at the photo until my eyes watered. The anger didn't come all at once. It arrived in waves, soft but sharp, like tidewater cutting through sand. I gave because I believed they were drowning. They were redecorating while I skipped meals to make sure they stayed afloat. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under me. The apartment seemed smaller now, every shadow edged with betrayal. The hum of the city below had turned from comforting to mocking. My mother's words echoed uninvited. It's not about who helps, Solène. It's about families sticking together. But family wasn't supposed to stick like glue. It was supposed to hold without suffocating. I closed my eyes and let the memory play out. Her voice calm, her logic neat, her tone too soft to be questioned. She'd always known how to turn guilt into obedience. When I opened my eyes again, I was still staring at that post, Leora's little girl smiling inside the room I had paid for. The child didn't know. She wasn't guilty. But the lie behind that happiness burned all the same. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake until dawn, watching the sky shift from black to gray. The sound of footsteps reached my door around 7. Leora's voice followed, too bright for morning. "Hey," she said, stepping into the kitchen, her hair damp from a shower. "We're so grateful. Mom said you agreed to help again. It means the world." The spoon in my hand stopped midair. "I didn't say that," I replied. Leora blinked. Confusion flickered, then defensiveness. "She said you nodded." I hadn't. Not once. The room stretched between us, heavy and unkind. My words came out low, measured. "Don't assume my silence is agreement." Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. She muttered something about coffee and retreated toward the guest room. I sat there, feeling the quiet roar through my head. They weren't just using my money anymore. They were using my name, my voice, my permission. They were forging my consent out of habit. I spent the rest of the morning in my office nook. The coffee went cold as I went through more documents, each file another thread of deceit. Mortgage forms I'd co-signed years ago, insurance notices forwarded without context, tax paperwork that still listed me as a dependent even after I'd moved out. They had taken pieces of me and built their stability out of it, piece by piece, brick by brick, until I no longer recognized where my generosity ended and their greed began. By afternoon, my resolve hardened into something colder. I printed every receipt, every screenshot, every post that erased me. I stacked them neatly, the paper warm from the printer. Proof was power, and I finally had enough of it. The smell of roasted chicken drifted down the hall again. My mother's doing. Dinner around 2. Same play, different act. I stayed in the office until the voices in the kitchen faded into television laughter. Later that night, I shut the laptop and locked the drawer. My reflection in the dark window barely looked human. Tired eyes, clenched jaw, a stranger I was learning to recognize. They'd mistaken quiet for obedience. They'd mistaken love for debt. I brushed the stack of papers once more before turning off the light. They thought silence was surrender. I'd show them what silence really meant. I hadn't made it out of bed when the first buzz rattled the stillness of the room. I let it vibrate into silence. Then again, and again. By the third, curiosity overpowered dread. I reached for my phone, thumb stiff with sleep. The screen lit up with a notification. Leora's live. A thumbnail stared back at me like a slap. My living room. My couch. My bookshelf with the spine of beloved tilted just slightly out of line, the way I always left it. That little imperfection had been a secret comfort to me, proof that I existed in my own space. Now it was just background noise in someone else's curated moment. I tapped the screen, already knowing I'd regret it. "We love coming to our cozy little family spot in the city," Leora's voice cooed. That syrupy tone she reserved for her online audience, the curated sweetness that made strangers fall in love with her while I stood, year after year, invisible at family events. Behind her, Vera moved through the kitchen with casual possession, fluffing a throw pillow, rearranging a vase on the island. My vase. My island. The camera panned to the window, catching the skyline that had cost me 3 years of doubling shifts and eating ramen in silence. Hearts bubbled up the screen. A comment blinked into view. "That view. You're so lucky." I stopped breathing. That's what they called it now, lucky. Not sacrifice. Not effort. Not hours spent choosing solitude over dependency, budgeting instead of brunching. No. Just luck. Polished. Filtered. Shared. And in those carefully crafted 37 seconds, my life had been rewritten without my permission. My name wasn't in the caption. My face wasn't in the frame. I had been edited out of my own home. Again. I dropped the phone on the nightstand and lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling like it had answers. My chest tightened, not with panic, but with something colder, heavier, a sinking, unspoken ache that had followed me for years. Later that morning, the knock came. Soft, familiar. The kind that asked for entry, not forgiveness. Thatcher stepped in, rain glistening on his coat, umbrella folded neatly at his side. He kissed me gently, but something shifted when our eyes met. His gaze lingered. What happened? I handed him my phone. He watched the video silently. Once. Then again. His expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened just slightly at the end. A slow breath escaped his lips. Do they know what this costs you? I said nothing. He didn't push, just reached across the silence and placed his hand over mine. Not to fix, not to take over, just to stay. That night, dinner was quieter than usual. Leora had taken over the guest room, her belongings already strewn across the dresser like she'd lived there for weeks. Vera had claimed the couch, declaring it perfect for reading, even though I hadn't seen her open a book in years. Halfway through the meal, Vera joined us. She sat down like she was hosting, smoothing her napkin into her lap, surveying the table with that soft, predatory smile of hers. And you, Thatcher, she began, her tone as light as wine. What do you do again? He answered without hesitation. Civil litigation. That's nice, she nodded, as if the phrase carried weight. Do you think you two can support each other long term? Financially, I mean. The words came wrapped in honey, but the blade underneath was obvious. I froze mid-chew. Thatcher didn't flinch. We're comfortable. We planned carefully. Vera's smile lingered, but the warmth had gone out of it. That's good. Relationships are easier when one person isn't carrying too much weight. I set my fork down. The clink against the plate felt louder than it was. He didn't rise to the bait. That was something I admired about him. Where others would react, he observed. But I knew what she meant. She wasn't asking about our budget. She was weighing his usefulness. Just like she had with Mark. Mark, who couldn't keep a job, who I'd supported for 6 months out of guilt and hope. Mark, who Vera had praised until she found out he had no savings and no prospects. He's not husband material, she had said, brushing off her earlier compliments like crumbs. You deserve better. But better never meant kinder. Or more honest. Just more useful. More impressive. More worthy of her borrowed pride. When I excused myself, I wasn't even pretending anymore. I left my plate half full and retreated to my room, sitting on the edge of the bed like I'd done after long shifts, wondering if the silence I'd built around myself was protection or a cage. I stared at the floor. They weren't here to reconnect. They were here to assess, to take inventory, to probe the foundation of my life for cracks they could squeeze into. Again. The next morning, Leora floated into the kitchen like nothing had happened. Mom says we should extend the weekend. Feels like home here. I didn't answer. I poured my coffee and sat down at the table, both hands wrapped around the mug like armor. Across from me, Thatcher watched. Quiet. Steady. His presence didn't try to fill the silence. It respected it. When Leora left the room to take a call, he leaned forward. Do you want me to say something? I shook my head slowly. Not yet, I whispered. But they just walked past a line I never drew. His brow lifted, and I met his eyes, really met them. For once, I didn't wonder if he'd leave when things got heavy. I didn't brace for a shift. I just saw him, present, patient. Tomorrow, I said, setting my cup down. I draw it. That night I didn't sleep. Not fully. I lay there thinking about all the invisible lines I had allowed them to cross over the years. Small ones at first. A comment dismissed. A favor demanded. A presence overstayed. They never asked because they didn't need to. I had trained them well. But this, broadcasting my space, reframing my independence as some family inheritance they could casually flaunt, was different. It was the second spill. The first had been years ago, my college fund absorbed into Vera's legal fees when she tried to sue her ex. Family helps family, my mother said then. It'll come back around. It never did. That was the first spill. And this was the second. Less visible. More dangerous. Because this time, it wasn't about money. It was about story. Identity. Ownership. They hadn't just taken space. They had taken narrative. And once someone steals your story and tells it louder than you ever could, getting it back is nearly impossible. But tomorrow I'd begin. Not with an argument. Not with a confrontation. That would only feed the part of them that thrived on spectacle. No. I'd begin with boundaries. With silence. With locked doors and one-sentence refusals. The kind of rebellion that doesn't scream. It simply stops letting you in. And that's how I'd take my story back. Quietly. Deliberately. One line at a time. The next morning, the apartment was colder than usual, though the thermostat hadn't moved. I sat at my desk staring at my laptop screen, the cursor blinking like a dare. The city beyond the window was wrapped in its usual gray light, quiet except for the low hum of buses and the faint rattle of the pipes. My coffee had gone cold. I typed in the number for the bank. The automated menu chirped through its options until a human voice took over. Pleasant, professional, oblivious. Could you confirm if there are any open lines of credit under my name? The pause that followed wasn't long, but it was long enough. Paper rustled. Keys clicked. And then the voice changed. Still polite, but cautious now. Yes, ma'am. There's an open HELOC. Home equity line of credit. $80,000. Joint account with a cosigner listed as Vera Salter. The property is under an address in Pittsburgh. My mother's house. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. When was it opened? 2 years ago. I ended the call before she could finish the script about customer satisfaction. My hand was trembling, but my face felt strangely calm. They hadn't asked. They hadn't even told me. I walked to the window. The sky was heavy, pale and different. The city kept moving. My chest, though, stayed still. A flash of memory, Vera holding a stack of mail, smiling, saying, "We're just doing some updates. Just paperwork." The envelope I never opened. The form I didn't question. It all slotted into place, sharp and cruel. They hadn't just used my name. They'd used my credit, my history, my clean record, the thing I had built from scratch while they called me selfish for living on my own. For a long minute, I couldn't move. Then I did. Slowly, deliberately, I dialed Thatcher. "They used my name," I said when he answered. "My credit. My future." He didn't speak right away. "You're sure?" 80,000 sure. There was quiet, the kind that only comes from someone calculating the truth without question. "What do you want to do?" he asked finally. "Make it hurt," I said. "Legally." By the afternoon, I was sitting in an office that smelled of cedar and stale coffee. My financial advisor, Marcus, scrolled through documents with the detached precision of someone who had seen too many families implode over less. "You still hold 33% of the property," he said, eyes on the screen. "That clause you insisted on years ago, it protects you." "I want out," I said. He nodded slowly. "You can invoke your right to liquidate your share. It will force them to either buy you out or sell the house." I stared at the floor. "Do it." He hesitated. "You're sure?" "I'm done being their foundation." He filed the paperwork that day. A week later, Vera received the letter. I didn't have to see her face to imagine it, the disbelief, the outrage wrapped in wounded innocence. The letter was short and merciless. Effective immediately, a new owner has acquired partial interest in the residence. Rental terms to be negotiated. No arguments. No loopholes. Just facts. I didn't burn their house. I simply took my name out of the ashes. 2 days later, Leora showed up at my door. No knock this time, just the thud of a fist against the wood. When I opened, she stormed inside, coat half-buttoned, hair tangled like she'd run all the way from the train station. "Did you seriously evict Mom?" I didn't flinch. "I didn't evict anyone." Her voice rose, sharp and cracking. "She's sick over this. She said you blindsided her." "She blindsided me first," I said quietly, "when she forged my consent." Leora's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "You could have talked to her." "She could have asked me," I said. "Once." The silence between us stretched thin. I could see her trying to gather the right mix of outrage and pity, the family's favorite cocktail. "You're not the person I thought you were," she said finally. "No," I replied. "You never saw me. You saw what you needed." She turned toward the door. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but not today." The door shut behind her. The echo hung in the air, solid and final. That night, I poured a drink I didn't want and sat by the window, watching the streetlights blink against the rain. The city looked the same, but everything inside me had shifted. I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross, and I didn't want to. My phone lit up once more, Vera's name glowing on the screen. I let it ring, then stopped it before voicemail could record the sound of my breath. An hour later, she called again. This time, she left a message. One word. Hospital. I didn't call back. I stared at the voicemail icon on my phone like it was a stain I couldn't scrub away. Just one word. Hospital. Sitting there without explanation, without punctuation. No second message. No update. Just that. A word meant to shake me. I called the hospital directly, bypassing the performance she clearly wanted. The receptionist sounded like she'd answered too many of these calls already. Polite, perfunctory, weary. There's no patient here under that name, she confirmed after checking again. I'm sorry. I wasn't. I hung up, placed the phone face down on the table, and let the silence claim the room. This wasn't about illness. It was bait, deliberate, manipulative. Another attempt to reroute me back into their narrative. A desperate chapter rewrite, mid-sentence, mid-healing. She knew exactly what that word would do to me, the hesitation it would cause, the guilt it would resurface. It was no longer about reconciliation, if it ever was. It was psychological warfare, guilt cloaked in grief. An hour passed before I heard Thatcher's key turn in the door. He walked in, glanced at me once, and didn't ask. He just set his keys down like he always did and sat across from me on the sofa. She's weaponizing your worry now, he said gently. I nodded. They've exhausted guilt. Now they're testing grief. Neither of us said much after that. Outside, rain started again, slow, rhythmic, steady. It tapped the windows like it had been watching us too long and grown impatient. That night, the real avalanche began. It started with a ping, a notification from a name I barely remembered. A second cousin I hadn't spoken to since I was 17. She's your mother. After everything she's done for you, this is how you repay her. The message blinked like a neon accusation. An hour later, an aunt chimed in. Family doesn't mean conditional love, Solène. Another. Do you even remember who raised you? Then the real masterpiece. You've always been so cold, so calculated. You're not better than us. By midnight, my inbox was a digital confessional booth, stuffed with passive-aggressive scripture. Old family friends dropped in for their turn. Money doesn't make you a better daughter. As if I ever claimed it did. I didn't respond. I didn't delete. I let the words live. I read each one slowly, not for meaning but for tone, for punctuation, for who signed their name and who hid behind initials. They didn't want answers. They wanted shame. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to flinch, to apologize, to crawl back into the version of me that served them best. But shame needs consent, and I was no longer available for self-betrayal. Still, something about it all, a residue, settled in my chest. Familiar. Heavy. Like grief's cousin, but with sharper teeth. It wasn't sadness. It was a strange sort of mourning for a lie I used to believe. That if I just tried harder, loved louder, gave more, they'd choose me. I opened the drawer beside my bed and pulled out an old photo album, one I hadn't touched in years. Near the back was a snapshot from my 28th birthday. I'd rented a small cabin upstate, paid for everything, decorated with my own hands. I'd sent the invitations myself, written the names in gold ink, arranged the centerpieces. Vera had forgotten. She didn't bring a gift. Spent most of the weekend on her phone. Barely looked at me, let alone said thank you. Leora, of course, made a whole post about it. A cheerful, bubbly collage of laughs and bonfires. She wasn't in most of the photos, but somehow I wasn't in any. That part stuck with me, that I had curated something that erased me. The next day, Thatcher called me from his office. I picked up on the second ring. "You need to see this," he said. He sent me a link to a parenting forum, one of those sanctuaries where mothers traded recipes for empathy and passive aggression in equal measure. Leora had posted. It was vague, but intentionally so, carefully curated to dodge accountability while inviting applause. "When family turns their back, children suffer," she wrote. I never imagined my own sister could be so heartless, all because she needed space. Some of us don't get that luxury. The thread exploded. Dozens of women jumped in. Some shared their own stories of estranged siblings. Others offered prayers. Most condemned me, without ever saying my name. The cruelty wasn't sharp. It was soft, sympathetic, the kind of cruelty that smiles while handing you poison in a teacup. I read the whole thing. I didn't flinch, but I didn't sleep that night either. 3 weeks later, the fallout reached my door. A certified envelope, legal-looking, thin but final. The boutique was closing. Rent unpaid. Inventory returned. Employees laid off without severance. Her daughter's private school had denied financial aid. An internal audit revealed discrepancies on the Hellick loan paperwork. Fraud investigations quietly began. I wasn't named. I didn't need to be. She had gambled with my name and lost. I didn't gloat, but I didn't cushion the fall either. Some lessons need bruises, not because they hurt, but because they remind you where you should never step again. Then one evening, the knock came. Soft, measured, not desperate, almost rehearsed. I opened the door. Vera stood there. Her coat was soaked, clinging to her like a second skin. Her eyes had that hollow, foggy look. Not rage, not regret, just ruin. She didn't wait to be invited in. She crossed the threshold like she owned the right. "You won," she said. Not bitter, just empty. I studied her face. The fine lines etched by years of judgment. The mouth that once knew how to curse me into silence. The eyes that had scanned rooms for people more important than me. And I felt nothing. "No," I said. "I survived. That's different." She blinked once. Her lips parted, as if another sentence had considered being born. But it wasn't worth it. She turned, walked out, her footsteps a whisper on the hallway carpet. I didn't watch her go. I closed the door and let the lock click shut behind her like punctuation. The hallway still echoed with her footsteps long after she left. It was a sound I thought I'd grown used to, a soft clatter of heels over hardwood, the rustle of a purse slung over a shoulder, the pause at the door that always meant something was left unsaid. But this time, it settled differently. Heavier. Permanent. The door clicked shut behind her. I didn't move. The silence was a kind I hadn't met before. Less of an absence, more of a statement. The air inside my apartment shifted, lighter, strangely, as if her departure had taken something invisible but suffocating with it. No windows opened. No fans blew. But I could breathe again, and that alone made me suspicious of the life I'd been living until now. I stayed standing, eyes fixed on the door, half expecting, no, half dreading, it might swing open again with some well-practiced line. Another version of the apology I'd heard too many times before. The kind of apology that made you feel guilty for needing one. But the door stayed closed. She was really gone. I turned slowly, like someone relearning motion, and walked toward the kitchen. My mind reached for a task, something to root me in the ordinary. Tea, dishes, the laundry I never folded. But before I could choose, a notification pinged. My phone buzzed on the counter. A message. From Marla, our mutual cousin. The peacekeeper. Always the olive branch, never the backbone. It was just a link. No message. No preamble. Just a digital breadcrumb dropped in the middle of my afternoon. Instagram. Leora was live. I almost ignored it. Almost. But habit has a way of masquerading as instinct. My thumb tapped the link before my mind could object. The feed opened to her bedroom, bright, curated, and painfully familiar. Her walls were lavender now, her lighting warm and cinematic. A string of fairy lights framed the room like a storybook lie. She stood center screen, barefoot, laughing. And then I saw it. My graduation dress. Deep burgundy. Classic cut. Fitted at the waist. The kind of dress that didn't beg for attention. It commanded it with grace. It had been mine. A symbol. A ritual. A memory stitched with silence and sweat. Leora twirled in it, spinning slowly. The hem lifted just enough to show the shimmer of her practiced performance. The caption slid across the bottom like a knife. Mom gave me this when I got into Columbia. A reminder that dreams don't die. I didn't expect the hit to land as hard as it did. But it did. That dress had once lived in a garment bag, wrapped in layers of tissue paper. I remembered packing it after my final thesis defense, folding it with care like it might wrinkle the weight of my effort. I'd never worn it again. It had stayed in my closet, untouched, sacred. So how had she found it? I didn't need to ask. There was only one answer. My mother had opened a door I'd closed long ago. My closet, my room, my history, recycled like heirlooms no one asked to inherit. They hadn't just taken the dress. They had taken the moment, the meaning, the me out of it. Leora had always known how to perform innocence. It was her favorite role. I stared at the screen. Her laughter felt rehearsed now. Sweet, soft, engineered. It wasn't the dress that hurt. It was the rewrite. The quiet theft of something I had built silently and worn like armor. She had pinned her name to my past like it had always been hers. Again. And what was worse, no one would question it. Not our family. Not the viewers. Not the comments flooding in with heart emojis and praise. To them, she was the dreamer. The achiever. The girl who'd never lived in my shadow because they never saw one. But I was done being invisible. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just closed the app and opened my laptop. Subject line, closure. Message. I'm not angry, but I won't be your ghost anymore. I CC'd Vera. She'd know what it meant. I hit send. Then I opened the group chat, our family thread, the one where I was always tagged last, if tagged at all. I scrolled past old pictures of weddings I wasn't invited to, inside jokes I was never in on, and happy birthday messages that felt more like obligations. Delete. Gone. I changed my number. I called the leasing office and signed a new agreement. Different building, different block. No forwarding address. I left the keys to this apartment with the front desk. No letter. No instructions. No explanation. I took only what I needed. The rest I left. Memories too heavy to carry and too familiar to burn. There were no boxes labeled family. No albums to protect. Just clothes, books, my laptop. And a new journal. The new apartment was smaller, brighter. The walls were blank, clean slates that didn't remember arguments or apologies. The scent of fresh paint clung to everything. It smelled like beginning. I unpacked slowly, deliberately. No rush, no pressure. And when I finally sat down, cross-legged on the bare wooden floor, I opened the journal to its first page. This home begins with me. I didn't write anything else. I didn't need to. That weekend, Thatcher came over. No ceremony. Just 2 bags of takeout, 2 glasses, and a quiet understanding. We sat on the floor with the window cracked open. The city whispered in the distance. Horns, laughter, a dog barking down the street. It all felt far away, like I was watching a life I used to chase but no longer needed to catch. He handed me a container of noodles and pulled out his phone. "There's a message from your niece," he said. I didn't look at the screen. I looked at him. "She says she misses you." I held his gaze. My throat tightened but didn't close. I nodded. Let her miss me. He didn't respond right away. He didn't have to. I wasn't asking for confirmation. I was claiming something I'd never allowed myself to hold, space. "That's how healing begins," I added softly. He reached for my hand. Not firm, not possessive, just present. We sat like that for a long time. No background music, no metaphorical swell. Just breath, skin, silence. And the truth. This time, the goodbye wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't screamed in a kitchen or typed in all caps. It was quiet, but it was real. And it was mine. The envelope was pale blue, thick, unassuming. It had been slipped under my door sometime between the 2nd and 3rd cup of coffee that morning. I hadn't heard it arrive. I didn't open it. It sat on the edge of the table, the return address unmistakable, the private school Leora had begged me to help her daughter get into. I knew what it was without reading it. A request. A final, desperate reach backward. They wanted confirmation, financial documentation tied to the application. Evidence I had never agreed to provide. Evidence they assumed I would hand over anyway, because I always had. I didn't touch the envelope again. Just moved it gently to the side, like you do with something fragile you no longer want. I've spent years giving answers to questions I never asked. Now I get to choose silence. The apartment was quiet in a way I hadn't known I needed. The air didn't carry the residue of anyone else's perfume. No one opened my fridge without asking. No one's voice filled the hallway uninvited. Toby lay curled by the sliding door, his chest rising and falling with easy rhythm. I made my coffee slowly, measured scoops, water just under boiling, the way I liked it, not the way they insisted. This morning belonged to me. There were no unread messages, no missed calls, no texts from cousins trying to play both sides. The group chat I'd left weeks ago hadn't attempted to resurrect itself. That silence, too, had become sacred. I carried my mug to the window, the one facing east. Sunlight poured in without apology, draping itself across the hardwood like something earned. The building across the street caught it just right, turning red brick to gold. My reflection shimmered faintly in the glass, older, calmer, more real. It didn't sting to see her anymore. The piano recital came back to me suddenly, uninvited but gentle. I must have been 10. I had practiced for weeks, hit every note without flaw. I still remembered the weight of my black shoes, the nerves in my fingertips. After the applause, Vera clapped too, but not for me. "She helped you practice," she told the crowd, gesturing to Leora. Leora hadn't even touched the keys. I hadn't been ignored. I'd been repurposed, turned into scaffolding for someone else's moment, repeated, reframed, rebranded, until it was no longer mine. I breathed out slowly. The ache was still there, but softer, less sharp. It no longer hollowed me out. It just lived beside me now, quietly. Thatcher appeared behind me, barefoot, holding his own mug. He kissed my temple, murmured a good morning, and followed my gaze. "You didn't respond to the letter," he said. I didn't need to, I replied. It's not about me anymore. We sat on the floor with our coffee, legs crossed, backs against the cold wall. The simplicity of it felt like ceremony. I didn't feel like fixing anything. Not today. Maybe not ever again. For once, that wasn't failure. It was freedom. Later, I pulled out my journal, leather-bound, clean, no names inside but mine. I flipped to the back and tore out a fresh page. I wrote, "Forgiveness isn't always owed. Sometimes, it's just the end of needing an apology." I folded the page, slipped it behind the frame on my bookshelf. The photo there showed me standing alone at the Brooklyn promenade, hair blowing in every direction, a half-laugh frozen mid-breath. No one else was in that picture. That was the point. Toby barked once, tail thumping against the floor like a small drum. I stood, grabbed his leash, and clipped it gently to his collar. "Let's walk, boy," I said. "It's a good day not to look back." Sometimes, walking away isn't giving up. It's choosing peace over performance, truth over tradition. Have you ever been expected to sacrifice simply because you could? Have you ever said enough and meant it? Let me know in the comments. And if this story spoke to something in you, subscribe to the channel for more quiet, powerful stories just like this.